Imagine this. You are sitting across from a man who has spent 83 winters on this earth. His hands are weathered. His voice is a low, slow rumble, the sound of a lifetime condensed into syllables. He has outlived his business partners, his rivals, and, as he will soon confess, his own illusions. You ask him, as a polite conversation starter, what advice he would give to his younger self about money. You expect the usual wisdom. Save early, invest wisely, avoid debt. Instead, he falls silent. The silence stretches for so long that you begin to think he hasn't heard you. But then he looks up, and his eyes carry a weight that has nothing to do with financial loss. He says, "My biggest regret about money is that I treated it as something to acquire." This is the central paradox that haunts the final chapters of a life well lived. We spend the first half of our existence believing that money is a container. We fill it, we guard it, we count it. But the old man has realized a terrifying inversion. Money is not a container, it is a current. And he spent decades trying to dam a river. He sits in a house he owns outright, with a portfolio that would make a financier nod in approval. Yet he describes his relationship with currency as the single greatest failure of his existence. How does a man win the game of accumulation only to lose the plot of his own life? What did he see in the quiet moments of his final years that transformed his definition of wealth from a noun into a verb? This video is not a lecture on compound interest. It is the key to a locked door, the door to the cell we build for ourselves when we confuse the map of money with the territory of a meaningful life. And what lies behind it is not a strategy. It is a reckoning. If this old man's haunting confession already has you questioning your own relationship with money, subscribe now, because in the next section, we're going to uncover exactly how this hidden pathology took root in his life and how it might be taking root in yours right now. The old man's regret reveals a hidden pathology that most financial advice refuses to name. The problem, he realized, was never about how much he earned. It was about what money became in his mind. Early on, money was a tool for freedom. But somewhere in the middle decades, without him noticing, the tool became the master. He began to see every decision through the lens of accumulation. A dinner with friends became a cost. An afternoon spent idle became lost income. A risky but passionate career move was dismissed as financially irresponsible. What he diagnosed in his final years is what psychologists call instrumental conditioning of the self, the slow, silent process where a person begins to treat their own life as a financial asset to be optimized, rather than an experience to be lived. He realized he had fallen into a trap the ancient Stoics warned about, the confusion of the means with the end. Seneca wrote that poverty is not having too little, but wanting more endlessly. The old man had wealth, but he had also built a mental architecture where scarcity ruled. He was rich in assets, but impoverished in attention. Every moment was filtered through a ledger. He would calculate the value of time with his children, wondering what else he could be doing. He was not greedy in the vulgar sense. He was captured. His own mind had become a prison where money was the guard and the gauge for self-worth. The hidden problem, then, was not a lack of financial literacy. It was a slow, decades-long transaction where he traded the irreplaceable currency of presence for the counterfeit currency of a growing bank balance. And by the time he noticed the exchange rate, he was out of time to reverse it. The old man began to see that his personal regret was not an isolated failure. It was the logical endpoint of a world that had taught him to worship the wrong God. The consequences of this hidden problem had quietly reshaped his entire existence, and he watched it happen in slow motion, powerless to stop it. Relationships became transactions. He would calculate the return on friendships, subtly prioritizing those who could advance his career or open doors. He measured his own worth by his net worth, which meant his self-esteem fluctuated with the market, a volatility far more damaging than any stock portfolio. His children grew up not with a father, but with a provider. They received his money, but not his presence. And now, In his 80s, they visited out of duty, not intimacy. The very wealth he had sacrificed everything to secure had purchased the loneliness he now sat in. He saw this pattern echoed in the culture around him. He watched younger men and women making the same trade, their eyes fixed on a number in a bank account, believing that reaching it would unlock the peace they craved. But the number always moved. The finish line always receded. The consequence of treating money as the primary pursuit was a life spent perpetually in the waiting room of happiness. The stakes, he understood too late, were not financial ruin. They were existential ruin. A man could have a perfect balance sheet and a bankrupt soul. The grave does not accept wire transfers. The final accounting is not in dollars, but in moments lived fully versus moments spent in quiet, anxious calculation. And as he looked back, he realized he had spent decades counting coins while his life evaporated like morning mist. The question now was whether anyone would listen before they made the same mistake. If this vision of a life spent counting coins while time evaporates struck something deep in you, hit that like button to let me know you're ready to break the cycle, and subscribe so you don't miss the old man's radical prescription for redemption in the next section. The old man's prescription emerged not from a book or a seminar, but from the brutal clarity of hindsight. He distilled his remedy into a single, counterintuitive principle: stop managing money and start defining it. For decades, he had allowed money to define him, his schedule, his relationships, his sense of self-worth. The reversal required treating currency not as the master of his existence, but as a servant with strictly delegated authority. He realized that the question was never, how much can I accumulate? But rather, what do I want my life to stand for? And how can money serve that? This shift, he confessed, felt terrifying at first. It meant saying no to lucrative opportunities that conflicted with his values. It meant spending on experiences and relationships, even when the accountant in his head screamed about wasted resources. He uses a powerful metaphor. Imagine a gardener who spends every day sharpening his tools, organizing his shed, and counting his seeds, but never plants a garden. That was his life. The tools, the money, became an end in themselves. The prescription, then, is to put the tools to work in service of a life you actually want to inhabit. He urges a radical practice. For 1 year, make every financial decision based not on maximizing return, but on maximizing meaning. Take the trip, take the risk, take the time. Spend money on deepening relationships rather than protecting a balance sheet. He learned that the greatest wealth is not a number you die with, but a collection of moments you lived fully. The path to resolution is not about earning more. It is about wanting what money cannot buy and ruthlessly pruning everything else. It is the difference between a life spent counting and a life spent living. And for him, the tragedy is that this wisdom arrived just in time to be too late. The old man's ultimate truth arrives like a final breath, quiet, devastating, and irrevocable. He looks across the table and says, I thought money was safety, but I was safe and I was empty. I thought money was freedom, but I was free and I had nowhere I truly wanted to go. The revelation that binds everything together is this: money is a magnifier, not a foundation. It does not create meaning. It amplifies whatever meaning already exists. If your life is rooted in love, purpose, and presence, money will enhance those things. But if your life is hollow, money will simply make the hollowness more comfortable and therefore harder to escape. He spent decades building a fortress of wealth, only to discover he was the only prisoner inside. The paradigm shift he offers is radical in its simplicity. Stop asking what money can do for you and start asking what you are doing with the one life money cannot buy. Time, attention, connection. These are the non-renewable resources. Money flows back. Time does not. The old man's greatest regret is not that he failed to accumulate more. It is that he succeeded too well at accumulating the wrong thing. He traded the irreplaceable for the replaceable. And now, in the final chapter, He understands that the only true wealth is a life where you look back and see not a ledger of transactions, but a tapestry of fully lived moments. So here is the question the old man leaves with you, before his voice fades and the silence returns. If you reached the end of your life and realized you had optimized everything that didn't matter while neglecting everything that did, would you call that success? The old man's money will be inherited. His regret is the only inheritance he hopes you will not claim. The key is in your hand. The door is before you. The only question is whether you will turn it before it is too late.